All right, part 8 of 10, They Got Their Man by Elmer Lynn Williams, a story of income tax persecution. Top of page 141. Here it is, stenographic report of a special meeting of the Chicago Teachers Federation held at the Auditorium Hotel, 9th floor, Chicago at 2 o'clock p.m., Sunday the 6th, A.D. 1937. Miss Margaret A. Haley addresses the meeting. I have thought that I would never have another experience that was not like some other experience I have had before, but I had one this week, and I know you will bear with me for a moment if I tell you that it was not only new, but it is one if I were only about halfway through the period that I have gone through. I think I would stop everything and go after the thing that is troubling me just now, and that is men's foolish thing they call court procedure. If there is one thing in the world that needs women, and I would say above all women teachers, to come in and overhaul it, is our system of jurisprudence and what they call justice. I am so disturbed after 3 or 4 days by my experience of this week that I do not want to begin anything until I get out of my system what happened. I was a witness in a case before the federal court, and there were in the room as other witnesses people with whom I worked on a reassessment some years ago. There was not a person in that room who had any right, privilege, or power under the law to say the things that we all wanted to say, and not one of us could open our mouths except give our names, tell where we lived, and a few things like that, and then say nothing and go back to our seats. I am telling you, teachers, that these men's laws have got on my nerves so this week by their utter lack of taking the human element into consideration that it seems to me if I were only 10 or 15 years younger, I would have to go out and say to the world and say to the women of this community and every community, you certainly have not used your power with the ballot to any purpose where the courts are concerned. Hold on.
Hello, this is a free call from
Hold on. All right, let's continue on. Top of page 142. I had to take a phone call there from Dennis Morgan Hicks, who informed me to watch a Showtime mini documentary in 4 parts called Outcry. So anyway, that ought to be a good. He said a lot of things that happened in that Outcry mini documentary happened to him with coaching young children to testify in a certain way. Anyway. Top of page 142, we're going to continue with the speech of Margaret A. Haley. When I came out of the federal courtroom, I wanted to say to all of those men in there, blame you, I wish I could never have to go into the company of a man again. They are so unreasonable and silly. I would like to get miles away from the experience of this week. I sat in the witness chair where I knew the man before the judge was charged with something that I know he did not do. He was supposed to have cheated the government out of some income tax alleged to be due. The man is a man who had been in numerous services for the city of Chicago, county of Cook, and for good government generally. There was Judge Hawley on the bench, and the man who told me the first word that I ever heard as to how the reassessment could be done in Chicago talked quite at length. He showed us the way to do it, and there was the man who did it, pilloried before the court. The judge knows perfectly well what the man did on that work. No one knows better. No one knew better than Mr. Ego. There were half a dozen men in that room, and not one of them but what could have told what that man did and how, and they all were absolutely silent. All they could do was to tell their names and where they lived, and then just yes to one question. Did he know Mr. Malone, and how long we had known him? They would not even let you say what kind of man he was. It was so absurd that it seems to me that after this is over, when we may talk, we cannot talk when a case is before the court. After this is over, we ought to make some kind of demonstration that would show that we think about pillaring, what we think about pillaring. William H. Malone gave all he had to give, displayed the best proof of integrity I have known in public life in all the time I have been in it. And that man is being paid back in the federal court. They would take, and then on page 143 is a picture, black and white, of Margaret A. Haley. Underneath it says, when Miss Haley appeared in the federal court as a witness in behalf of Malone, she was prevented by District Attorney Ego from testifying as to her knowledge of many facts which she firmly believed would clear Malone. After being denied the right to testify fully, Miss Haley called a meeting of the members of the Teachers Federation. In a remarkable speech to the teachers, Miss Haley said in part, William H. Malone gave all he had to give, displayed the best of integrity I have known in public life in all the time I have been in it. Let's go on to the next page, 144. They would take his head if they could do it. They are so anxious to discredit him and his work that they may bury him. It is a heartbreaking experience to have had everything to do with that wonderful piece of work. I never wanted so badly in my life to get up and to tell them what they ought to do. I will never be able to tell you what a frightful thing it was. Frightful for that judge, terrible for the man they were prosecuting, and it was terrible for the people who were witnesses, who were bound hand and foot and could not do a thing they wanted to do. I hope I have got it out of my system, and maybe I will sleep tonight. Margaret Haley, on January 5th, 1939, quietly passed from the stage of action, where she had been a dramatic figure. She was born in Joliet, Illinois, November the 15th. More than 70 years before, the Chicago Teachers Federation conducted a memorial for her on March the 5th. The tributes to her memory of Miss Haley are published in an attractive booklet. Michael L. Ego, James B. McKay, Richard J. Finnegan, Mayor Edward J. Kelly, and William H. Johnson, Superintendent of Schools, all paid tribute to her by speeches or by letter. I looked in vain for any reference to the greatest episode in the history of the Teachers Federation, the reassessment of the Chicago's real estate, a battle won because of an order given by Malone. According to reliable sources, the Chicago political machine insisted that no reference to the reassessment could appear in this memorial. Hence, the most notable chapter in Miss Haley's career was omitted. The address of Ego reveals his Machiavellian tendencies, even on an occasion so sacred. He spoke of Miss Haley's coming to Springfield, but referred to only one legislative contest, the battle for women's suffrage. It is obvious why Ego failed to mention the battle for the reassessment in his memorial speech. Ego said, "She seemed to be one of those remarkable women who never compromised with error and who was intolerant of intolerance itself. That is why she lived her life. That is the way she lived her life. It is not often that people of any community are permitted to know an individual like unto the lady in whose memory we met here today. It is not often that it is given to any one of us to come close to a genius, and it is not often that it is given to any of us to be privileged to work along behind that sort of leadership." The name of Judge William H. Hawley, an old friend of Miss Haley, did not grace the memorial booklet. And then on page 146 is some sort of scan of something like a document. Let's just read it. All 12 Malone jurors, when given all the facts, reverse their verdict and now ask for clemency. All 12. To Honorable William H. Hawley. Honorable Sir, we, the undersigned members of the jury in the trial of William H. Malone in your honors court, in which we returned a verdict finding Mr. Malone guilty of the charge of income tax evasion for the years 1929 and 1930, most earnestly petition your honor to exercise the power vested in you by law to see to it that Mr. Malone is not required to serve the sentence inflicted by this honorable court because of our verdict. We base this request on the fact that Mr. Malone is a citizen of splendid standing, is highly regarded by all those who know him, and further, that we realize that his income tax dispute is very technical matter and therefore should be passed upon by men thoroughly trained in such intricate problems. We further urge that he be given a hearing before the Board of Tax Appeals, whose membership is composed of men chosen because of their ability to analyze such complicated cases. And then you have 12 signatures. I'll read them as best as I can. Robert A. Boudet, Charles E. Veal, Charles Puffamamam, Fred H. Miller, Frank Helou, I can't read these, it's cursive writing here, H.G. Gwick, Howard I. Holbeck, Norman R. Beckley, Davis H. Oceangaga, Mac O'Damon, D.J. Callahan, W.J. Davidson. All right. Anyway, that was cursive writing. That's how they wrote their names. Anyway, let's go to top of page 147, chapter 16, the probation puzzle. In the United States District Court of Judge William H. Hawley, Equal and exact justice to all men of whatever state of persuasion, religious or political, the preservation of the general government in its whole constitutional vigor as the sheet anchor of our peace at home and safety abroad, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of person under the protection of the habeas corpus and trial by juries impartially selected. These principles form and the bright constellation which has gone before us and guided our steps through the age of revolution and reformation. Thomas Jefferson. To a judge, this is a poem, I guess. O thou who wieldest for one fleeting day the power and belongs alone to God, O idol molded out of common clay to sway one little hour an iron rod, your softest speech may smirch the fairest name. What reputations hang upon your breath? Your fiats may translate from fame to shame. Oh, or bring dishonor blacker hued than death. Walter Malone. Broken in health and fortune, his wife and invalid sister and others depended upon him. Malone, urged by a host of friends, applied for probation. The hearing was set before Judge Hawley. A federal judge, in setting his plea for probation for hearing, had not stayed the mitimus. The order demanded the U.S. Marshal to deliver Malone to the warden of the penitentiary at once. Federal agents, fearful lest even a small degree of justice might be shown, tried to rush him to prison before his application could be heard. Having been warned of this plan and upon the advice of his attorney, he sought refuge in a hotel to await the time for his appearance in court. Deputy marshals raised the wail, "Malone has fled!" Although his bond was still posted, the agents of the government invaded the victim's home in the night and demanded access to all rooms from basement to attic with no regard for the privacy of his invalid sister, nor consideration for his weary but courageous wife or his 3 little grandchildren asleep. The big boots of the law resounded on the stairs and in the impatient OGBPU. What's that, OGPU? OGPU. I don't know. I have to look that up. The OGPU, and it's in quotes too, searched for their prey and ransacked the home with the same fine chivalry as was displayed by the government agents at the port of New York. Had they found their victim, he would have been rushed to prison, thus denying him even a hearing for probation. Malone was not located. However, he came of his own free will at the appointed hour to Judge Hawley's court. At a part of the plea for probation, a petition in his behalf signed more than 2,500 citizens, many of them eminent in public life, was presented to the court. Among the signers were such men as Lewis L. Emerson, former governor of Illinois, General Roy D. Keene, head of Illinois National Guard, William F. Clark, dean of the law school of DePaul University, John F. Voigt, president of Illinois State Bar Association, Margaret Haley of the Chicago Teachers Federation. Every member of the jury, now aware of the injustice their verdict in convicting Malone, now joined in urging the court to grant probation. But Judge Hawley said, "If I were to grant probation in this case, I could never sit on this bench and send another man to prison." The statement invites examination of Judge Hawley's record in granting probation. It implies that he has a moral yardstick by which he measures the propriety of extending the probation to some men and denying it to others. He did not amplify his reason, so I do not know by what rule Judge Hawley determines when to exact the pound of flesh. In granting probation, is he guided by the nature of the crime upon which the applicant for probation is convicted? Judging by the brutal treatment inflicted on Mr. and Miss Malone on their voluntary arrival in New York, a disagreement with the government over the amount of income tax claimed and was considered a most infamous crime. Measured by the violent abuse and falsehood employed by Ego in prosecuting Malone, one might believe the charge was of such dastardly character as to put him beyond the pale of law. We know it could not have been the nature of the charge, for Ego, who prosecuted Malone with such venom, dismissed the indictments against the Dowdle brothers, who were indicted for evading $458,000 in income taxes. Thus, the Dowdle case voids that theory. It should be said again that the Dowdles, however, they are nephews of Pat Nash, the Democratic boss and sponsor of Ego for the position he then held and in his unsuccessful campaign for U.S. Senator. Moreover, one of the Dowdles warned the Chicago political bosses that if he were put to trial, he would tell who got the money from the profits of his sanitary district contracts when Chicago's Mayor Edward Kelly and Pat Nash were getting rich down there. Those considerations doubtless weighed heavily with Ego. The dismissal of the Dowdle cases must have stood like a specter staring at Judge Hawley as he denied probation to Malone. The specter still stares. There is left to us only one method to probe probation by Judge Hawley, we must examine the probations he extended to other men convicted in his court. Of that he cannot justly explain, and it may help us to understand his method for measuring justice. A merciful judge. Judge Hawley granted probation to Peter D. Pincusjon on February the 7th, 1938. He had been found guilty by a jury and sentenced by Judge Hawley to a penitentiary for 2 years. Pincusjon and two Confederates were making counterfeit U.S. Internal Revenue stamps. They had a large quantity of the stamps and the plates to make them when they were arrested. They had made a quantity of counterfeit bonds as well as Pincusjon was seized. When Pincusjon was seized, Pincusjon had a criminal record dating back 15 years before Judge Hawley granted him probation. Following are some of the facts from his criminal history. He had a mammoth cutting plant where smuggled whiskey and was adulterated with redistilled, denatured alcohol. When Pincusjon was arrested on October the 15th, 1924, after a year of secret investigation, federal officials declared they had their leader of a nationwide conspiracy. 2 weeks after he was indicted and admitted to bond, he was again being sought by the government as a result of the seizure of an automobile containing 20 cases of whiskey. J. Wurzburg was a co-conspirator of Pincusjon. He pled guilty and took the stand for the government. He was given a grilling by attorney Henry Freeman, who defended Pincusjon. Freeman was a former law partner of Ego's. He was later appointed clerk of the United States District Court when Ego became district attorney. Judge Walter C. Lindley, in imposing sentence of 2 years in Leavenworth and a fine of $10,000 on Pincusjon in 1924, said this was a continuous and deliberate plan to violate the prohibition laws and utter disregard for the law. I would rather be known as a robber than as a bootlegger. They have no conscience. Pincusjon was both a robber and a bootlegger. He was convicted with others of robbing the Sibley warehouse of $1 million worth of whiskey, according to the Daily News of December the 30th, 1924. Pincusjon's petition for probation presented to Judge Hawley recites that he was not permitted to take the witness stand in his own behalf by his counsel due to former conviction on a charge of violating the national prohibition law. The Chicago Herald of January 11, 1925 said Pincusjon is reputed to have cleaned up more than $1 million in the last 2 years, operating several whiskey cutting plants. He also was accused of bringing liquor into Chicago aboard his airplane. I'm going down to prison to join Big Tim Murphy and the other boys, and I'm going to have one good long rest, said Pincusjon. Pincusjon packed into his traveling bag half a dozen pairs of silk pajamas. I'm taking them along in hopes they'll let me wear them, he said. Down on the south side, he used to be just Pinky. Then, after he made $1 million, lived like a prince and maintained an airplane and 4 automobiles. He became P. David Pincusjon. We insert here for the order of Judge Hawley granting probation to Pincusjon, February 7, 1938. Peter D. Pincusjon, the defendant in the above entitled case, having entered a plea of guilty and having been sentenced to custody of the Attorney General to be confined to the U.S. Penitentiary for 2 years, comes now the defendant and makes application to the court to be placed on probation as to all counts. Unlawfully making, forging, and counterfeiting strip stamps, possessing plate with intent to defraud, and conspiracy to do so. The court, having heard the evidence in support of said application and being fully advised in the premises, and it appearing to the satisfaction of the court that the ends of justice and the best interests of the public as well as the defendant will be subserved, thereby it is ordered by the court that the cause shall be continued and that execution of sentence upon all counts shall be suspended during the probation until further order of the court, and that said defendant Peter D. Pincusjon herein, after called probationer, he placed upon probation for the term of 3 years. From this date to Walter K. Urich, Chief U.S. Probation Officer, February 7, 1938, signed William H. Hawley, Judge, docket number 29223. But the best interests of the public were not subserved. Not long after he was placed on probation, Pincusjon defrauded several Catholic clergymen and had to be sent to prison. A list of over 70 outstanding cases wherein persons convicted in Judge Hawley's court and granted probation by him will be found in the appendix. From a study of some of the cases in which Judge Hawley granted probation to men convicted of the vilest crimes, I find no yardstick by which he measures justice. Brushing aside the Malone petition, pleading for probation signed by thousands of Malone's neighbors and a host of eminent citizens, and another similar request signed by every juror who had served in the case, ignoring the medical opinion of his physicians that prison would endanger his life. Judge Holly denied probation to Malone. Although it was the eve of Memorial Day, the court refused him that respite, and he was ordered to be locked up immediately and held until a shipment of convicted men would be ready for the federal prison. We have just witnessed another Dreyfus case right here in the USA was heard above the turmoil of the angry crowd that filled the courtroom. One stooped old veteran solemnly remarked as he left, "Tyranny such as this stirs men's souls and spawns revolution. Follow, if you can, all the ramifications of the political powers which can secure liberty for ex-convicts, robbers, bootleggers, counterfeiters, and conspirators. Then try to fathom why the same judge who granted these probations denied probation to a man who for 50 years in the public and private life was honored and respected. The only charge was that he disagreed with the government as to the amount of income tax to be paid." Sometime after sentence was passed and probation had been denied, this short verse was handed to me by one who had attended court every day of trial. "Oh, say it is not so. Is this the democratic way? Oh, say it is not so, that we our fathers' hopes betray, and stoop to deeds so low? Awaken, sons of stalwart sires, to shout, it shall not be. Rekindle once again the fires, to guide and keep us free." Chapter 17, in Durant's Vow. I will not attempt to describe what must have been Mr. Malone's thoughts and feelings as the train bore him away from his devoted family and his friends who had stood so faithfully by him, and from the state he served so well. He knew then the truth of the proverb, "There exists no cure for the heart wounded with the sword of separation." Arriving in the Lewisburg prison and suffering from a chronic ailment, he was confined to a hospital bed for over 60 days and was gradually getting worse. He became so weak that the physicians at Lewisburg decided to remove him to the federal prison at Springfield, Missouri. They informed him that the reason for the change was that institution was far better equipped to handle his case, and particularly so if an operation became necessary. On August the 4th, 1938, Malone was notified to get up, don his prison garb, in spite of his weakened condition. He was to leave that day. The weather was exceedingly warm and the thermometer hovering around 100 degrees. With 12 other men, he warily marched to a filthy, antiquated day coach. From every indication, it had not been cleaned for years. All the windows were closed and locked. Because of the heat, soot, and dirt, it was very hard to tell the white from the colored men who sat there sweltering in chains. 28 long hours of torture passed, but during the journey without a place to lay his head, and this after being taken from the hospital where he had been bedridden for over 60 days. Chapter 18, another homecoming. Back from the Bastille to a royal welcome. If anything could compensate for the mental torture and physical suffering he endured, it was the overwhelming ovation Malone received from hundreds of friends and neighbors upon his return home. What a striking contrast was this enthusiastic reception to the brutal treatment of Malone and his wife by government agents when they returned from Europe. Here is the description which appeared in a hometown paper following that great demonstration of neighborly feeling. We quote from the Park Ridge Herald. When the news was broadcast that William H. Malone would arrive home on the Saturday afternoon on March the 24th, hundreds of friends immediately started making arrangements for a huge gathering of his fellow townsmen to greet him upon his arrival, and what a welcome they gave him. When the auto in which Mr. and Miss Malone were riding stopped in front of their home, a great cheer went up from the throng, which packed not only the spacious home but the large grounds as well. Men, women, children rushed forward, each trying to grasp the hand of the man who, because of a lifetime of friendliness, charity, and upbuilding, has earned their affection and deep esteem. The shouts of welcome rang out from all as they smilingly acknowledged the impressive enthusiasm of their townsfolk. The scene was indeed most thrilling. The large rooms were banked with flowers, bearing cards of well-wishers from near and far. Loyal friends turned the greeting into a real love feast after several speeches in which the speakers paid sincere tribute to his wholesome, unselfish, and untarnished life. The Park Ridge School for Girls was represented by a girls' choir. The girls sang several songs, one composed by one of the members especially for the occasion. A large leather-bound book with pages of parchment containing hundreds of names of friends was presented to him. The book contained the following resolution to William H. Malone. extending far beyond the limits of personal sentiments, dwarfing all else that any man may encounter in an imperfect world. Thousands of men and women of your community, friends, neighbors, well-wishers, all join in this expression, so richly earned over the years. We firmly declare that in our knowledge, life can bestow no finer gift and testament to you or any man than this very profound faith and confidence held for you unstintingly through thick and thin by your associates and fellowmen. In that very trust you have fashioned for yourself your greatest reward. You have maintained that integrity of manly character against all odds, thus strengthening the confidence we have always placed in you. Therefore, be it resolved that in recognition for distinguished service to your community for years of praiseworthy conduct in public office, for personal courage under fire, as friend, patron, and benefactor, for demonstrating all those sterling qualities of faith, loyalty, generosity, understanding, courage, and compassion, we, the citizens of Park Ridge, express our sincere thanks and appreciation. The speaker who made the presentation recalled a similar book of parchment had been given to Mr. Malone over a quarter century ago when Malone retired as mayor. Many of the signers had long since passed on. There were, however, quite a number who signed the first book, who took unusual pride in renewing their expression of faith after the passing of so many years. The testimonial contained the following inscription and poem. To our retiring mayor, William H. Malone, an honest, courageous, and tireless official, this testimonial is presented by his friends. Who cares for the burden, the night, and the rain, and the steep, long, lonesome road? When at last through the darkness a light shines plain, a voice calls hail, and a friend draws rein, with an arm for the stubborn load. For life is the chance of a friend or two, the side of the journey's goal. Though the earth be a desert the long night through, yet the gay flowers bloom and the sky grows blue, when a soul salutes a soul. Never in the history of Park Ridge had there been such a demonstration. It must have been a great inspiration to a man who has devoted his whole life to courageous endeavor and unselfish devotion to the cause of mankind. Park Ridge Herald. A week later, that same journal published another article and included one of the many messages from those who could not attend the reception. It deserves a permanent place in this record. Last week's Herald published an account of the homecoming of our esteemed neighbor, William H. Malone. While the news of the event was widely circulated by the cosmopolitan press, the Herald was able to give a more intimate picture than the papers of distant cities. Herald readers will recall the wonderful demonstration accorded Mr. Malone upon his arrival from Europe 2 years ago. We therefore submit a matter of human interest, a copy of one of the hundreds of letters received by him since his second homecoming. The letter from Father Kemp of Loyola University is indicative of the precious freedom of expression and action enjoyed by the USA, which is a condition of the past in many parts of Europe where national sentimentalism and religious intolerance are running rampant. The author of this splendid letter was born in Park Ridge, educated here and in Europe. Father Kemp, a devout Catholic, rejoiced and expressed his heartfelt happiness because of the homecoming of his fellow townsman, who is a Protestant, Mason, and a member of the Shrine. It is such a freedom of expression and religious tolerance that causes us to realize the value of real democracy and the horrors which have followed in the wake of its destruction, as witnessed in the Fane's foreign lands today. The letter follows. Loyola University, 6225 Sheridan Road, Chicago, Illinois, March 24th, 1939. Dear Mr. Malone, this may be termed a little letter from a friend to a friend. You the older, I the younger, and it carries with it great feeling of joy and satisfaction that you are home with us again. I have honestly been wondering what Park Ridge is without Mr. Malone. Certainly, it would have been much less beautiful city. Then, too, one instinctively feels that you did a great deal to open up the city, transform it from the one-horse status to that of a respectable community that occupies a prominent place in suburban life. Whatever may be said, I, for one, can honestly say that you put a new soul to the old town. So what a pleasure it is for me to be able to receive you, be it in this very impersonal way, back amongst us once again. Yet, what interests us most of all is yourself, your health, and your family circle. After all, the interior things of life are most precious, and it takes the world a long time, separated as it is from the more spiritual things of life, to appreciate them. I hope now that you will have the time and peaceful leisure to devote yourself to the beautiful things of life, which I know you have always held in first place. God bless you, Mr. Malone, you and the entire family, and you know that you have a particular place in my prayers. Cordially, to an old friend, John Arthur Kemp, S.J. Chapter 19, An American Dreyfus. The Confession and Penance of Mr. Harold L. Ikes, Secretary of the Interior. Months have passed since the introduction of this book was written, in which Dreyfus' case was cited to illustrate that an innocent man may be convicted by an official tribunal and almost an entire nation be deceived and convinced of his guilt. Yet an exhaustive investigation, including the background of the condemned man, the motives which inspired the prosecution, the nature of the evidence, and the manner of the trial, may reveal the innocence of the victim who had been falsely branded. Now, by a singular coincidence, an article by Mr. Harold L. Ikes, Secretary of the Interior, appears in a popular magazine May the 25th, 1940, characterizing the late Richard A. Bollinger, Secretary of the Interior under President Taft, an American Dreyfus. The article of Mr. Ikes, which he says is by the way of confession and penance, has confirmed my judgment that a review of the case of William H. Malone should be published, and that the comparison of his experience with that of Dreyfus' affair is most appropriate. First, because Mr. Ikes confesses that for 3 decades I believed Bollinger guilty. It was not until recently, says Mr. Ikes, when I read Henry F. Pringle's scholarly Life and Times of William Howard Taft, that I was shocked into the awareness that during all these years, in common with the American people, I had been doing a grave injustice to an innocent man. All right, I'm going to stop at the top of page 161, and we'll pick up with part 9 there.